we should be good to go. Yeah, if you still want to post art for Crit, you can. There's no guarantee that I'm gonna fit you in, because I've only got 2 hours, but feel free. There's no particular order I'm going to tackle this. It's kind of an empty crit session today. So, I guess I'll start with a spoon. We're going to blast through these reasonably fast. So, the question here is any feedback on how to do sort of more complex details and how to suggest them a little bit better. We're going to assume that you only want to draw using, you know, a sort of pencil-esque brush. There are a couple of things I want to tackle just before we go into exactly how I think about tackling some of these details, like the overstatement of midtones. So on this spoon, we'll zoom in. You've got a really bright highlight here, which is crazy bright, and then you do have this secondary highlight, this warm glow down here. But the problem is, I forgot to screenshot to Discord. The problem is at the moment that warm highlight you're almost getting as bright as the actual highlight, and they're nowhere near. You know, so I think we could probably wash over the whole spoon and say those highlights are really bright, and then actually maybe those other warm highlights are just there by virtue of the fact that we put shadow around them, but they're not getting anywhere near as bright as those initial highlights. So I think this is getting way too bright. The other thing I'd focus on is perspective. I know it's a spoon, and so it's kind of easy to not think too hard about the perspective, but especially if you're thinking about how you can simplify these details, simple shapes across from each other in perspective are going to work quite well. Whereas at the moment this is kind of a bit flat. Mostly around this handle is where the perspective seems to die off. I'm not quite sure what's happening. Maybe it's because you've got this cast shadow here that doesn't quite follow the reference. I think in the reference the cast shadow is probably going to bend over that way and then come in there, right? So I'd think about that. And then the detail itself, I think you just need to be a little bit stronger with your decision making. I know that sounds obvious. Let's just take this bottom bit of the handle. Let's say it's roughly this shape. So there's a definite structure to this. I think we spoke in one of the previous crit streams about this idea of concave and convex surfaces. So if I have a ball with a circle in, and then another ball with a circle in, and I say that the ball is lit from the left side, so we're going to get this gradation from right to left. We can do that again here. If I also do it right to left on this central ball, then it seems like it pops out. So that is doing something like that, or more like that. But if I shade in the opposite direction, right, it seems like it goes in. So in and out, concave and convex. And the really simple way of thinking about this is that the side, if you want it to be convex, so it comes out, then the side that is lit is going to be the side closest to the light source, and if you want it to be concave, the side that's lit is going to be the side furthest away from the light source. So, really simple, you can apply it to anything, but let's apply it to this base of the spoon, basically. So, I'm thinking about this form, it's convex, it comes out, it's mounding around, so I know that I have to shade this side of it. And I'm going to commit to shading that side of it, and I'm going to shade it fairly strongly. I think some of this is getting a little bit scribbly. I'm not really clear on where the lit side ends and where the shadow side starts. You know, you've got this, some of these scribbles are dancing between those two sections, and then I'm not sure what's happening down here as well. It feels like it should probably join up there, you know. So I've got that. I can apply that to everything, so I can apply that to here, shading from the left. Now here, same thing, but now it's running on the inside. And then we have all of these shapes that are going to follow a similar rule. So you can see that I'm putting down a mark, and then I'm gradating it outwards towards my light source. And then at a certain point it sort of falls into shadow. Right? So what I'm doing is I'm getting this sort of basic structure down that the rest of the information and detail lives inside of. You know, a lot of these details, they're dancing on top of the surface of this spoon. And so you want to work with primary forms first. It's a bit like if we were painting a face. Here's my face. There he goes. He's got eyebrows. He's got a much bigger head. He's got ears back here. I wouldn't get the nose and then start like rendering and scribbling around on just the nostril first before I figured out anything else. I get the big shapes of the face, so I'd say the face as a whole is lit from this side, right? The whole nose is lit from that side and joins up, and you can spend a long time just figuring that out and getting that right. And then you can say, well, now I want the detail of the idea that he's got like spots on his nose, or he's got a scar coming up here, but that relies on it sitting on top of a form that's already predefined. So, thinking again, back to the spoon, now that I have this form, there's nothing stopping me going back in and saying, well, actually these parts curl around, and then further up it's doing something else that's kind of curly and a bit weird. Then this part splits into two, maybe up here, I don't know. It goes into something else that happens into something else, right? But it's sitting on top of this hard work that I've already put in. I've put in that initial effort to define some pretty big planes. Even this part at the end, you can see that it's sort of curling upwards, and you can see it's curling upwards, and it's getting less light. So let's just get that down. Right. So I'm drawing, but I'm painting at the same time. There's a lot of crossover between them. You know, maybe I can just begin to sort of scribble in indications of detail, whatever else. Maybe I take the white back in and I start painting back in with white. But hopefully you can see how something like this is a lot more solid than something like this, and I think it's because it has those sort of defined plane changes to begin with that the details are sat on top of. So I'll screenshot that, and I'll put it in feedback. Next, got this. So this is a continuation from last week's feedback, I think, or the week before. And the question is that picking good colours eludes you. There are a couple of things I like to do to give myself a bit of a head start there. One of the things that I find is that when we're looking at an object, when looking at anything, any kind of a subject, we're looking at it through light and through atmosphere, and then we're looking at it using the lenses of our eyes, and there are all sorts of other variables that come in. So very rarely will you get something that's sort of truly monochromatic. There's so much colour that's bouncing around and coming from all sorts of places. Now, it's a nighttime scene, so it might be a little bit more monochromatic. But I think we want to start from a place of visual interest before we paint this up. So I like underpaintings. I really, really like underpaintings. I've probably done a video on them. If I haven't, then I'm an idiot and I should. And one of the ways that I like to get an underpainting is with just other images or a pattern stamp or a mixer brush. Now, pattern stamps and mixer brushes are kind of specific to Photoshop. So instead, I will just do it a different way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up one of my oil paintings that I've done this year. Let's grab this one. And I'm just going to select it. Or I'm going to select a small part of it. Put it on here. And just scale it up to the size that I want it. Then maybe I'll duplicate it and flip it a couple of times and set that to lighten or darken. Lighten. And then I'll do that, but the other way. And what we'll end up with is something like this that just has noise from the start. So it's got variation in hue. It's got variation in color temperature. It's pretty flat in terms of value, and we can flatten it out even more if we want. But it's got something to work with. So if I take that and I'd paint on top of it, and maybe I'll do a duplicate version where I do that. But I could just set this to something like soft light. And from the get-go, this blue is now, it's not just flat one color blue. It's blue with cools and warms and textural information. Maybe the texture's a little bit overwhelming. So what we could do is make it much smaller. Let's duplicate them. So, got a little bit crossover there. So the texture's not quite as overpowering now, and obviously we can play with opacity. But we're just introducing variation, right? A variation in contrast. All sorts of different contrasts in there. Some of those we might actually be able to work with. So some of these lights, maybe if we set this to linear light and then we put an inverted mask on it, we could paint back in that, you know, where we want these light sources coming out, and even then they have variations in warmth, and some parts are lighter and some parts are darker, and you get these intense light spots like there are mirrors and all sorts of things inside there that are bouncing off each other. And you can see that now that silhouette in the window, because it's overlaid on top of something fairly colourful, it's not blue anymore. It's like these warms, which it would be. Because it's in a room that's got lots of warm light bouncing around. So there's going to be warms, there's going to be warms on that figure. The light that's hitting the figure currently is cool, which is fine. I'm guessing it's like a moonlight. But if it's a moonlight, it's hitting from a very low angle, and it's very strong at the moment, rather than something that's maybe a bit more diffused. So let me turn this back on, because I like that. I'm going to turn those on, but maybe at a reduced opacity. And then let's see if we can light this a little better. The other thing to bear in mind is if you want it to read as moonlight, it doesn't necessarily have to be blue. This is something that someone like Craig Mullins might describe as the chocolate problem, where the sky is blue, trees are green, you know, grass is green, whatever else, and maybe we can knock some of those assumptions, right? If you look at a lot of master studies, it tends to be that they make the sky green or pink, or the grass yellow or a different color, right? So how about we just take this initial image, and instead of it being blue, it's just more grey. Like, does that work? I think that works. And maybe on top of this we get some of that cool light happening, but it's going to happen from above. So back of the shoulders, back of this might pop out a little bit. And then I'm sure we can start to introduce more contrast, right? This is the other thing in terms of the values with this image. It's not clear to me how this woman's skirt is like the darkest thing on the image when you have buildings and doorways that are all the way in here that are really deep and they're not receiving any light. So, you know, could they get darker? Yeah, probably. There's probably lots of information that we could have on this wall that might be nice. In fact, if this gets darker, then we frame the character's head a little bit more. Maybe we can get some more light on the top of their hands, the top of these pails, and maybe some of that warmth that's up here we get ever so slightly onto this character, because she's a bit cold. I know she's in moonlight, but just warm her up a little bit. Other things that don't quite make sense to me before we move on to the next one. Like, is this a cast shadow coming from something that's over here? Is it coming from... It makes sense that it would be coming from hair, but as if she's blocking the moonlight. But if there's already something blocking the moonlight, then she's going to be in shadow, and the floor's already going to be in shadow. Same thing here, like you've got this big sweeping cast shadow, which you're using quite well compositionally, right? You're cutting it through the character to silhouette them on. But it doesn't go anywhere. In fact, it kind of leads back to this, but then you're saying that the moon is like behind this pillar, right? And so the beam of light's being cut in half. So let's just think about where these lights are coming from. So all of this ground might get considerably darker, and that can go off screen, and we can say that it's the building that's blocking the light there. Like, that's fine. But then we have to light up this ground here and say she's the one that's blocking the light, and maybe it's sort of dissipating off around her, right? I think we're going to get more light coming up here to separate these two buildings. In fact, I think you had that in your original and I've sort of killed it a little bit, so yeah. Let's bring that back a little bit up here, maybe a bit brighter, and again a bit cooler. Is that going to be sweeping down this building diagonal? But as it's sweeping down, is it going to sort of pick up on things? Are they going to be like ridges or the tops of arches or things, you know, whatever it might be? That cool light might also start to come down from up here as well. Maybe we swamp him there. I've not looked at these kinds of sort of Venetian buildings, but I imagine there's all sorts of interest on the silhouette itself that we can bring in. And again, let's, I think, make some of this stuff darker. Yeah, I'm not sure compared with the last time we saw it that this is like the ideal composition. Let's just sketch one out really quick. If the idea is to have her looking up, I feel like you're in like a kind of awkward middle ground currently, where we're not actually looking up with her, but it's also not like a very flat composition. And maybe I would go towards those extremes a little bit more. So let's explore two options. And you did do some thumbnails, so this is the benefit of that exploration. I could imagine an option. She's got the buckets over her back. There's her foot, or whatever. Forgive me for the sketchiness. And the building in front of her is, you know, in perspective, as are the buildings to the side. So she's actually looking up towards a series of windows. And we can imply that she's looking up by getting more of these curves. In fact, maybe, you know, the bottom of her dress, and then we see the feet poking out or whatever. I feel like this side needs to, you know, lean up more. What does the top of the building look like? Has it got little things on? Can we see other buildings over here? Right, so you've got something more dynamic where we're looking up with her from further behind, or I quite like really flat images that feel like they have a longer, more telescopic focal length. So that would be something where actually here's our character, and she's quite small in the frame because she's not important. She's just a maid, and she's like dancing along, and you have these really flat lines behind her, and it becomes very graphic that she's like, you know, the moon's shining in, she's like dancing in this courtyard, and she's framed on all of these interesting black and white shapes. And the whole image is like a gradation downwards from, so you'd have, you ready? So we're going to gradate from here upwards. So it's going to get lighter at the top, right? And you get this big contrast of lighter at the top. But then our character is going to do the opposite. She's going to get... Oh no, she's not going to do the opposite. She's going to do the same, but it's framed on top of that, silhouetted or something. You know. So she's dancing and there's all this stuff up here. And you could probably make her even smaller than I've made her. I've made her a bit big, really. But there's two potential. You could almost imagine it like a tarot card or something, or like we are looking at the flat of the building. Okay. Let's screenshot that, put it in feedback, go on to the next person. So, next person, let's just group all of this into one layer, one group at least. Let's get rid of that. Get rid of that. This is the next thing. And this person has said, even though you're liking how this is turning out, you think you messed up on the facial proportions yet again. The eyes are way too big compared with the rest of the facial features. You think you're also messing up on lighting. You're trying to draw faces as practice with the oil painting brushes in CSP. Okay. So, in terms of facial proportions, it definitely seems or feels like you're going for something a lot more stylized currently. Compared with this, certainly. So things that you're going to watch out for, size of the eyes, but also just how far up the face they are, how much forehead is visible. You've given your character a completely different haircut, which is fine. Maybe you're just using this as more of a loose reference, but it's mostly eye related. Also just how quickly the jaw comes to like a sharp point. Notice that like this line here on the head and this line, they're angled inwards, but not like an anime face. And then they become a little bit more angled inwards, and then we've actually got a reasonable amount of space on the chin there. In terms of value, which is I think where you're probably falling down most in your painting, other than the drawing, I think you're again overstating midtones. So let's just look at the values of the image. I did that by pressing Control Y. So notice that this face is well modeled in the sense that it feels 3D. It does feel like a sort of solid form, but the values aren't as extreme as yours are. So for example, the side of this nose, so the ridge of the nose has that value, and the shadow of the nose has that value, and they're really close together. I think a big part of painting is almost seeing how little you have to change a value to get away with it. Let's take a look at yours by comparison. In fact, we'll put them next to each other. So this is the bridge of your nose, and then the shadow of your nose is getting much, much darker. So simple solution for this, for now, would be, let's just take the average skin tone of your face, turn my brush opacity down, and let's just paint over a lot of this. we're reducing a lot of the contrast. Tends to be, especially if you're going for this kind of a lighting setup, that we can rely on things like the nostrils and the eyes and the corners of the mouth to show form rather than big hefty plane changes. So you can have a plane change there, like if we want it like the ref, we could have the shadow of the nose down here, but it can be really quite subtle. It doesn't need to be this really strong thing. So before, after. If you want the nose to be a bit of a stronger form, maybe you're going for slightly different proportions to the other character. You want this to, the nose to feel like it's longer. Well, maybe we can increase the contrast a little bit, but it's still nowhere near as much, right? Next thing you're doing is you're getting these eyes, they feel a little bit sort of pasted on, right? Because all of these other planes that you have in light are facing upwards, and then you're saying that these eyes are completely in shadow. If you're going by this and you're trying to match this kind of a lighting setup, well, actually you can see that the orbit of the eye and the eyeball itself is a sort of sphere, and it's a sphere that comes out of the skull, and so it has 3D form itself that we can sculpt. So it might be that actually above the eye we're getting a little bit more light, right? The eyeballs themselves, you've done a good job of keeping them understated in terms of value, but you know, maybe they can receive a little bit more light, feel a bit more 3D. Things like nostrils and the corner of the mouth, you've got this sort of, let's make it 100% opacity, this sort of brown, which isn't too bad. But think about light bouncing, and as it bounces, it begins to pick up the color of whatever it's bouncing around. In this case, it's going to be the blood vessels and veins and things that are in the face, right? So if we have these nostrils, they're no longer going to be that brown. You can see that the reference does this quite well. I think we can get a whole lot warmer with them, right? And we can start warm and reasonably bright, and then maybe in the sort of crevice of the nostrils, it's still too dark, we can get a little bit darker still, right? Same thing with the corners of the mouth. Let's just warm it up. It doesn't have to be exactly the color I've chosen, but we can make it warmer. Just think about the idea that the corners of the mouth are gonna, again, it's not something that's drawn on top, it's a 3D form. We want to be thinking about everything as a 3D volume. It's difficult to do that if you haven't drawn or painted a lot of faces to understand, you know, how exactly this mouth is attaching to the rest of the face. Tends to be that there's a muscle. It's not a muscle. Well, it's a facial muscle that attaches there, you know, under that fold, and hopefully you can see how the mouth feels, maybe a little bit more 3D, like it's built in. So what else can we do? One thing that they do quite well here is this sort of self-shadowing idea, where because it's being lit almost directly from above, this angle, areas that gradate into darkness are just on the edges of the face. Like, you can see this happening everywhere. Is you get a darker value, that's gradating into light, and it's because it's turning into light. So again, it's not like a hack that you can just apply to everything. It depends on the lighting scenario. But in this case, these forms are turning towards or away from light. So first maybe we'll try and just proportion wise try and get some of that idea of what I was talking about before. And once we have that, maybe we can get the idea that we're sort of painting inwards from the edge of the face. And this is a really subtle little thing, so you gotta try not to completely overdo it. But that might help a little bit. Yeah, I think the main thing is the drawing. And I don't want to continue painting. I think I've given you enough to work on. If you were to work on anything, for me it would be the drawing. The drawing is sort of the root of everything else when you're painting, right? When you draw these eyes a certain size, you're saying something about the geometry, the 3D nature of the subject that is going to affect the kind of values that happen. It's going to affect how light interacts with it. It's going to affect the colors that gradate across the surface. It's especially going to affect the edges. And so solving those problems first, I think is really important. I would, assuming that this is meant to be a study of this, or at least it started that way, just begin to think about measuring elements of the image. So that's forehead down to chin. Like, where are the eyes? Okay, well they're kind of in the middle. The nose is probably about halfway in between that, and the center of the mouth is a third of the way down that generally. Right? So we need enough forehead space, and then look at how much hair's on top. I think you've probably overdone it here. You've got this huge chunk of hair. But again, if that's a stylistic option, then that's fine. But yeah, drawing, measuring. I can't resist. I'll do a little teeny tiny bit more painting. I think we're gonna have more shadow coming in from these pieces of hair. But it tends to be that fringes and things sort of curl round on themselves. So the shadow might be closer to the hair than you think it is. So there's your original. There's what I've done with it. Some changes, like the jawline that I've chosen, might not be the style that you're interested in going for, but hopefully you can see how some of this stuff applies. So we'll put that in the feedback channel. Then we'll go on to some of the loveliest looking, I almost want to call it paleo art, but it's not. They're like alien inventions. Let's screenshot it. This is very nice. Let's just group these and hide it. I think things are just getting a little bit loud, a little bit busy, a little bit noisy. We can't appreciate your design in all of its glory. So I would begin to think about flattening elements. I would definitely think about flattening, desaturating parts of the sky. This is super saturated, super bright, super distracting. I'd maybe just tend towards something grayer, even if we just do that with like a low opacity brush. We end up sort of neutralizing those colors a little bit. getting something more sensible. Now, if you wanted to reintroduce the sun, then we could, but it's going to be reintroduced on a slightly calmer background. I think we can go even grayer. And one thing I quite like to do is start mixing in warms and cools into my sky together. The next thing that I probably want to think about is just creating more of a value separation between your thing and everything else. So let's select your thing. It's got this cool dragonfly going over it. And let's just reduce the contrast in other parts of the image. So this bush in the background, so it's fine, but let's just reduce the contrast. We're going to make it one big shape. All of these bushes, they're getting so noisy, and maybe they can survive being noisy down here, but I think when we go far enough back, they're going to start collecting into a group of noise. If you know anything about video games, and you know what LODs are, it's almost this idea that you have variations on a single model. So you have like a really high poly detailed version of a model, and then a lower detailed version of a model, then a lowest detailed version of a model, and depending on how far away they are from the player, we don't need to show as much detail. So if we look at yours, like some of these things far away, like you're still painting in loads and loads of little blobs. I'm not sure I like this solution of blurring things as they go back. I prefer a sort of painterly blur, if that makes sense. So let's grab this. So this is level of detail 1. And then as it goes down, like how can we simplify this without destroying it? Well, we can say that it has a gradation from the bottom. It's lit yellow at the top. It has blue underneath that. And then in between those layers, it has some visual noise, right? So this is a much simpler version of this. But if it's further back in the background, like that's fine. And then if you got a version that was even further back, it might be even simpler. So it might not even have that noise. It might be something like that, right? And then that is going to be combined with other plants that are right next to it. So actually you're going to get bigger clusters or shapes happening of these things, right? So that's kind of what I want to do here. Very messily. It's a bit difficult to do retroactively. But I want to start grouping these shapes so that they're not... It's just too much visual information. Can't concentrate on our poor flying beast. You've got another one here that I didn't even notice. So let's just silhouette him against the sky a little bit more. Yeah. And maybe this guy should get a little bit darker as well, I don't know. You know, kind of killing a lot of your saturation. The other tricky thing with this is I think a lot of your decisions, like the crazy saturated sky, it does feel like that's part of your thing, you know. Like I'm looking at a lot of these paintings and it feels like part of the charm is the high saturation madness. I think the main thing is I would be more comfortable with an image being simpler generally. So let's take the same idea. Let's say that's our sky, that's our ground, that's our tree, and then on top of that we have one creature, and then we have two creatures, and then we could begin to, let's make that a bit brighter. Then maybe we could begin to, not that bright. Split up the foreground in a way that indicates perspective, so it's getting like really flat back here where a load of these are bunching up. I think we could do that. But to do that, I think a million billion dragonflies, and then on top of that there's like is this like a current of wind, or is this something that the dragonflies are producing? And then each one of these dragonflies has another insane level of detail to it. I just think it's getting a little bit noisy, and we could just think about simplifying it in some ways. So I'll put this in the feedback. There is a charm to these. It almost feels like you're going for like a 90s computer graphic. Like I could imagine this water being in like a vaporwave computer graphic, but I'd probably again want to join a lot of these groups together. I'm not sure if that's just my painting sensibilities that are making me want to do that, you know. Like, do I need all of this crazy stuff, or can I? One small thing is that this light is, but it's not reflecting anything. You'd need a sun here. The most this water is going to reflect is going to be the sky. Right, can't get lighter than the thing that it's reflecting. It can only lose light as it goes. Sometimes you're sort of clipping in terms of your values, so just bring the lightest value down and the darkest value up, and initially we get something that's a little bit more low contrast, but then we can really save that light value for where we need it. Like, is it going to be the water behind? I don't think so. I think the lightest value might come out of the engines of this thing, right? Or is this like a little cockpit for it? You know, maybe there's a little slither of highlight. So, yeah, you're getting a lot of value compression where maybe you don't need it. And then maybe we can go darker as well. Maybe we can say that just in those engines, we're getting like the darkest values. Just under that wing, we're getting something really dark. Just in that little crevice. But actually a lot of the rest of it is a little bit, just a little bit calmer. Maybe we get light again in the background. You know, bringing this down gives us a little bit more room to play with. Maybe we could go back up to something bright, but that would sit on top of this, you know, and that would be even more intricate and dancey. So try and avoid these big overexposed areas where everything falls straight to white. I think that's something I would avoid. Right, next is this. Let's group those. Let's grab the ref. I think there are some drawing problems that we can discuss, because drawing is king and we want to make sure that those are right. So you're sort of squishing the face, it feels. No, you're doing the opposite. You're making the face bigger than it is. Like a lot of the face, if we draw a box from the eyes down to the mouth, I guess. Like, it's a small box compared with the overall size of the head. Right. Whereas yours, you're getting pretty close to the size of the head. This forehead's coming in at a kind of a funny angle. Should probably come up straighter. I think the apex of some of these curves is in the wrong place. So when I think of there's a flat plane, there's a curve, the apex of the curve is here, which right now is kind of more or less in the middle. Okay, but I could have a curve where the apex is like there, you know. So the apex starts way further up, and that's a different shape entirely, right? It's going in a direction. I think the same thing's happening here. So the curve for like the side of the face, I'd say the apex is almost like down here. Like a lot of the weight of the jowls and things are gonna fall down, whereas on yours you've sort of got them coming out sideways. So the face as a whole feels a lot more circular, whereas I'd say this guy's face feels a lot more square. So I think about that. In terms of the actual painting, there are a few things that we can talk about, I'm sure. I'm just going to put this in the feedback channel first. Okay. So, in terms of the painting, things I would stay away from is getting a little bit too dark with some of your values. It's the kind of thing we spoke about with the first thing I painted over. So, corners of the mouth, you are getting pitch black. No one's mouth is getting pitch black. It's just not happening. There's light bouncing around in there. So let's set this to lighten. you're probably getting something like this, right? Same thing in the nostrils, maybe they can get a little bit brighter. Almost the same thing with the eyelids, though they are not as bad. Lower eyelids are getting a little bit dark, maybe. So corners of the mouth can change. Just think about this form for a second. So your lip, your bottom lip is doing this, and the shadow is right at the bottom there. On the reference, the silhouette of the lip is more or less the same, that's fine. But the shadow is doing something like that, right? So from a side view, your bottom lip is going, it's kind of going out, 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 and then it's going to be coming in a very sort of thin way before it does something else, because like this is the part that we're seeing that's in shadow, this tiny little line, whereas this, let's just we'll put on the top lip as well so it makes sense. Let's say that's our top lip. This one is curving a bit more softly because it's falling into shadow about halfway down. So half of this down here is going to be in shadow. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Also notice that the split between shadow and light curves up because that bottom lip is sort of made of two individual deposits, right? So you're getting two parts that are two spherical bits almost that are picking up light, and then between them the shadow's poking up a bit more. So like that's not an insignificant shape. Might seem very nitpicky, and it probably is. It's the kind of thing that at the moment would take you a lot of brain power, and it might seem boring to sit there and go, what shape exactly to a T is this? And it's not because you should paint that way, but maybe once you've done a lot of that hard thinking work and you understand not just that this is the correct shape, but this is the correct shape because it relates to the 3D nature of the object, that this is, I think, in the long term going to help you paint better from your imagination. Right. The other thing is that the contrast in the lips is maybe getting a little high. I don't mind it so much because it feels like you're deliberately making a high contrast version of the reference, but maybe we could reduce it a little bit, and then you're right, there is this sort of gradation from the corners of the mouth inwards happening. Like this here, this line. So what you're saying is, here's my face, here's my mouth, is you have the bottom lip extruding, right, and that has muscles that come with it, and then you have the chin that's coming back out and sort of cutting into that shape. It's not happening here. The chin is coming out, it is getting lighter, but it's not the same thing. What you've painted here as a shadow under the bottom lip, I think is actually facial hair. Or at least it seems like it to me. And notice how the facial hair follows the lip rather than coming down like a shadow would. So let's just follow this round. Right? And again, it seems like a small change, but it's not an insignificant change, and it says something about the geometry of this person's face, right, which is important. Other little things, like you're getting quite dark with the facial hair, even though it's quite light here. It's quite light because the color of it seems quite light. It's getting hit by light, but also because it's not a particularly thick bit of facial hair, so light is going to filter through it. It's not going to block as much light as you think. You can probably start blending it into the surrounding skin a little bit more. Feel like whenever you paint facial hair, you should always try and sort of blend it into the skin rather than having it just sit on top like a stencil or something. So let's do that. Do a bit of this, okay. The nose is fairly well handled, but then you have these sharp lines that just aren't real. They're not there. This shape connects to this shape. So this shape connects to this shape. And when you put a big sharp line there, you're saying that, like, I don't know, his nose is much more defined than it is in reality, right? Same thing here, like that is a sharp edge in the corner of the eye. It's not. It's really quite a soft edge. Because that is a form turning away from light in a soft way. And maybe it's getting too dark as well. Other things like eyelids. It's subtle here, but something important is happening. Where you have the initial fold. And then first of all, the fold is sharper in the center. And as it goes out, it sort of blurs at the edges and gets looser. But also, whenever you have this fold, there is a gradation out towards the light source. So that's that convex versus concave thing again. This is a concave form going in, right? And we're going to get a gradation outwards because this is a convex form. So let's just do that here. So we've got your fold, which is fine. But as it gets out here, it's going to gradate outwards. It's going to soften. And then this whole eyelid is going to soften upwards, right? And this hopefully feels a lot more natural than this, which is just a line, right? Similar ideas again, like this shape and this shape are the same thing. They're the same shape, they join up. Same thing here, this shape is going to go into that tear duct. You have shapes sitting on top of each other rather than being a bit more interconnected, which I would encourage. Okay. So I think that gives you plenty to work with. Other things that you've sort of given this person, like a 4 o'clock shadow, you know, stubble. It's just not there. It's a soft gradation outwards. And that's fine. It's okay to have a soft gradation outwards, okay. So I'll put that in feedback. Who's next? Who's next? If I miss you at all, just let me know, please. And I'll get to it, okay. Hello, Fish Flops. Fish Flops. Not the Flish. That's a different thing. This is next. Let's hide all of this. You said, how can I design better costumes without them looking random, even though everything was intentional when I made it, and any other critique? I don't think everything feels random here. I think it feels like a cyberpunk skin tight costume. Um, I think the distribution of shapes is fine. Personally, I get a little bit tired of the cyberpunk cybernetic booby trope. But if you want to do that, then be my guest. I would maybe not design a costume from that kind of angle. I'd probably always be tempted to, as my person, to design from more of a 3/4 angle. But I do know plenty of people that design from a side on. I'd design from a 3/4 because then I can see how these shapes are. Everything's very flat when you're viewing it from a front on, and it's not obvious to me how exactly this. What is that like? Is that just on the surface, or is it like a 3D object with depth that's coming out? You know, I think if you design from maybe another angle, you get more of that sense. Like same thing here. Is that a pattern on the surface, or is that? So let's imagine that we get those big cybernetic boobies on. Is this something on the surface, or is this something that, you know, is going in? I think if you view it from another angle, you get more of a sense of the sort of depth that might be going on, right? I think give yourself a better brief, because if you're learning how to design costumes and you give yourself cyberpunk woman as brief, yeah, you can design a cyberpunk woman well, but you can see that you're effectively reduced to like just drawing seam lines on skin. I don't think something skin tight is particularly interesting in terms of costume. Give yourself like I don't know, any other time period and genre, medieval fantasy. Like then you get to play with like cloth and the leading lines that come from cloth, and it feels like it's weighty, and that cloth is held up at certain points, right? And it's loose in some places, and not so loose in other places. Whereas here, it's effectively a human body silhouette that you've drawn lines on, if that makes sense. Like, not much of this costume, other than the shoes, is coming off of the body, which you might want it to. Thank you, Fish Flops. So, yeah, those are my tips. Can you repost the thing that you want crit on from last week while I do this next one, James? And then I will have a gander here. Anything I think you could improve on with your spoons? You struggle with details, but you're not sure how to do them. I think you're fine. I think you're doing fine. I think you're compressing information.
Oh, hello. Yep.
Reasonably well. Hello. Yeah. I don't think there's anything wrong with these at all. There are different ways that you could tackle detail. Maybe you could begin to think about abstracting detail. So, maybe we could take this one, and we could say, how can we represent this abstractly? So let's give it a go, shall we?
Yeah, that sounds good. I feel like when it gets to where there's lots of things like happening, like I can't go below a certain like line thickness, otherwise, like everything kind of ends at this certain line thickness, and I can't go lower than that. So it ends up looking a bit weird, or maybe too consistent in parts.
Yeah, I could understand that. So let's, like, how can we abstract this? is it just gonna get lighter in the middle? Like, is a gradient on top of a hard edge selection enough to make that read as a 3D metal form? Maybe if the lightness is thicker, and maybe if it gets darker and warmer on one side. Like, can we do that? Could we
Oh yeah.
take that and sample it and just get like a texture brush and do something like that? Like, we're implying that there's a lot of information there, without hand painting it.
Okay, yeah, I get you. Like
Yeah.
implying this detail without doing it per se. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think it's an important skill to learn, and it's a lot of fun. It's like a challenge that you can set yourself. But then the other thing is that you can go back on top of that, and now that you have implied detail, it's implied that the spoon is symmetrical, and it's implied that the detail is therefore symmetrical, right? So if on top of this implied detail, I just get a really little brush, and I just clean it up a little bit on one side. I say, actually, this is coming inwards. Like, I think the viewer can take that little tiny bit of information that I've sort of hand painted, and they can extrapolate it and say, well, the rest of it's like that.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So you begin to rely a little bit more on your viewer's understanding of objects in the world. But like, a lot of this is nonsense. A lot of this is just texture-y nonsense that you can get away with reasonably well. So maybe we paint this flower a little bit, but again, even the flower is just implied gooiness that we can put like a sharper highlight on top of, or maybe we can go a little bit darker in the shadows again. Yeah, because I actually think that you're seeing accurately with your studies, and you're reproducing the shapes that you're seeing fairly accurately. And so if you want to get these details, it's not about zooming in and just painting with a smaller brush, because you could, if you wanted, like, you could zoom in here, just make your canvas bigger, and then do a study of just that, right, without the rest of the spoon on a bigger canvas. And if you give yourself the time, just like you've been able to copy that, and you've been able to copy most of the handle, you'd be able to copy that fine. So I feel like the question you're maybe asking without realizing is not how can you paint detail, but how can you integrate detail into a bigger painting, right?
Okay, yeah.
Does that make sense? How can you fit in the detail with other parts? And I would say that, yeah, that a big part of that is just gonna be implying that it exists. Let me open up a spoon painting from last year. If I can find them.
Yeah, I've never really thought about abstracting stuff, just trying to one-to-one it in a way.
Yeah. Abstraction is a huge part of painting. So this is a spoon from last year. I've drawn like a couple of tentacle spots, but a whole load of this is just like, I've just put down a little brush stroke to say that it's rounded, or I've just like doodled on a little squiggle. Like, I'm implying that there's scratches on the metal by just scribbling. There's some little shapes here that say that there's some kind of information or detail. This is another one I've actually kind of gone in and drawn maybe a bit more than I usually would. You know, but even this, I've drawn like two little shapes to imply that there's like a claw on the thing, and when you zoom out it works and it's fine, but it's a pretty big leap. You know, in reality, you could really zoom in, and you could say, well, actually this part's rounded, so that needs to have some kind of gradation, and then there's probably a part on the top side of it that's lit, so that's going to be lit, and then when that joins up into this, well, maybe it's going to have another shadow underneath the elbow or whatever else, and you could zoom in and you could properly paint it. But I'm not going to. I'm just going to put a little thing down and not worry about it. So
okay, yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, more of that, more abstraction. I think abstraction is fun, and
So in terms of what you abstract, for instance, on this spoon here, we've got flowers that we may keep in. But in terms of what am I looking to abstract and not abstract? Is there a boundary per se?
the boundary is so up to you, and different artists do it in different ways. So,
Hmm.
should we? Let's look through the painting folder and see if we can find anything particularly interesting. I'm gonna take that. Give me a sec. So here are some examples. So this is a face I painted yesterday, I think.
Oh, nice.
And like, there's information here that is abstracted or lost. Like, this side of his face has disappeared. I haven't painted it in. There's an implied edge, kind of, where this zigzagging is, that there's some kind of a jaw, but it's not quite there. The corner of the eye, really that should go down and should be met by skin that could go into something else. But actually, if I have the iris and I have the shadow of the eye, it's obvious. Like, everyone knows what an eye looks like. That information is going to fill itself in. I mean, look at this. The iris is like touching this skin color, but all I need is this little shape on the edge to say that actually that's the other side of the eye. So we're making abstractions all the time. It's just how far do you want to go with them? You could argue that really, if you want to be the best painter in the world, you should zoom into everything as far as possible, and abstract and paint everything in super high detail, right?
Mhm.
But we don't. We, like, this shape here. That is an abstraction. That's me saying that the shadow on the top lip is going in a particular direction with a particular value, without me manually fading it out or anything else.
Oh, sick.
Here's a nice lobster, but like, really, most of this is a silhouette of a lobster. Like, look, this back leg just joins right up into the rest of the lobster. There's no joint. Arguably there should be some kind of shadow here. I don't know how it's connecting. I'd have to look at the ref. But that's not super important. Like, this lobster antenna thing. Yeah, I'm picking up some highlight up here, and I'm picking up shadow here, but in between, in the middle, it kind of just gets lost. Like, it disappears and then reappears. So, if you look at any master paintings, they do this really, really well. It's just getting comfortable with losing information, right? You don't need a whole boatload of information all the time. You just need some key features. This is a skull painting in oil,
Oh, nice. Yeah.
and like, the mouth is a cylindrical form. So it's the barrel of the mouth. And that cylindrical form is just signified really simply by the idea that there is a gradation from dark to light. That tells me that this is a cylinder. But the other thing is the curve of these two shapes. Like, these are gaps in between teeth. But if I took those and I put them over here, I mean, I can.
It looks like nothing like teeth per se, kind of thing.
Like, it's nothing. It's just shapes, and that's exactly what painting is. Is you're abstracting information. But within the context of the rest of the skull. Oh yeah, of course that's gaps in the teeth, right? But it's not. It's just shapes that imply something else. So, yeah, it's actually kind of a big fundamental painting question, isn't it? How far do you abstract things? But you're making abstractions all the time. You're doing it already, is what I want you to realize. It's not even a conscious decision when you paint or when you draw anything, you're abstracting information. We can't. I think someone said, I can't remember who it was, that if you look at like you find a book on the floor, right? Is it a book, or is it do you look further and it's actually a collection of sheets of paper? So you draw each of them individually. Well, you can look further and there are fibers on the paper that you can think about.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
kind of.
further than
Yeah.
that, you get onto the atomic level of the paper, or you could paint it as like a white rectangle on whatever plane it is. Yeah, so you could. There are so many different ways you could approach that problem, that the highest resolution version of the highest resolution solution might not be the best solution for that thing, unless you really really want to paint like that is the subject of the painting, is like a really crazy detailed book, in which case zoom all the way in and go wild.
Hmm.
So in terms of this, yeah, like maybe this top bit is actually where you want to put the focus, because there are some really interesting shapes there, and maybe this is getting a bit too granular and a bit too small, and
Yeah.
you just want to do it like I've done it
No,
just
for sure. Yeah.
But then you get other artists. There's I've been looking at a bit of Dan Peacock's art recently, and he does paintings that take him like 30 hours, that he zooms in and paints every single pore on like
Every atom.
the
Yep.
face of, yeah, and it's so that's a choice you can make, and some people do it really well. So it's not like there is a right or wrong way, and play around with it. I've got paintings. Should we find some? I always like digging around in my big painting folder. So I've got a study like this. From, I can't pronounce their first name. I think it's like Ulpiano Checker or something. But the second name's Checker, right? But this figure on top of a horse is so abstract.
Mm.
It's like
Yeah,
a
I didn't
silhouette.
even realize until you zoomed in.
Yeah,
kind of thing. Yeah.
it's a figure silhouetted on light. But the version in his actual paintings is obviously, it took him like months to paint, is a little bit more there. But here we've got a dark shape on light, and then his forearm is a light shape on dark, and you can go as far as that. Look at this guy. But it's amazing how much of this horse still reads as a horse, despite it being like a messy blob.
Mhm.
But then at the same time, I've got paintings where I've really dove in, and like I think this is a painting I've probably got a little bit more information in, to like little beady things, and I've actually got individual teeth here, which I don't really usually paint. I usually just try and imply them, but yeah. So those are different approaches. I'll put this in the feedback channel, and then it seems like other people are atting me. So let's have a look at James's.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. This one. I remember this one. Let's just join these together. I think I flipped it. Okay. This is a nice painting. It's a very nice painting. I'd begin to separate this dude from the background a little bit more. My main worry at the moment is between him and this tree, because coincidentally the color of his fur is exactly the same hue and brightness as this little tree trunk. So I would very simply kill that information. I'd kill it back. Or maybe I would be tempted to make it cooler or something by comparison. So we're not getting as much of a crazy thing happening. Things like this leaf, it's casting a shadow on his head, which is nice. Maybe it's also a tangent though. Do you see this point that comes in, and this value here, this green, I think is the same value as the tail in shadow. So if we go black and white, see they're the same value. So what you effectively have is like a really dark shape that's coming to a really thin point, and then that point is like doing that, and it's causing a lot of visual tension, visual noise. Not visual noise. Yeah, visual tension is the right word. So we've got solutions. We could bring the leaf up a little bit further. We could maybe curl it round so it's not as pointy and full of visual tension. Or we could say, actually, if the leaf is casting a shadow there, maybe it's casting a shadow on more of the tail, right? And so now the leaf shape is joining, but it's not causing a tangent because it's all that value. Or better yet, we could say, actually, in order for the leaf to cast a shadow, it must be in light. So now we've got a light shape on top of a big group of dark, right? So that little interaction, it's a small thing, right? It's a leaf casting a shadow on a tail. But the way that you've overlaid these groups of values and shapes, there's not an optimum, but there are ways that you can do that in a sense that looks better or feels better, I would argue, in simple ways. Let's see where else we can go with this. You know, things like the sword. Do we want that to be a little bit brighter? It's metal, and it's kind of a focal point. Other parts, I feel like I'd just kill. Let's kill some of this. His head. This leaf is casting a shadow like that. Maybe his head should cast more of a shadow on this shoulder. I don't know. He's a cool little guy. Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. The amount of sort of realism that you've got going. You know, maybe this leaf should have an edge to it. I just feel like there's a lot. It's quite noisy. Like, can we? I feel like you can make some pretty drastic decisions. Like, all of this stuff is really great, but actually, I wanna knock it back even further. It's still there, the information is still there, it's just lower contrast and darker. Maybe something narratively that I think could work with this is the idea that he is a creature that likes creeping around in the darkness. I think in your original, he's sort of half in light, half in shadow. There's shadow in the image, like this water's in shadow, but his legs are being hit by light, which doesn't particularly make any sense to me. You know, if this water's in shadow and it's being lit from above, then, well, the same shadow is going to be casting a shadow on all of him. Maybe that leg creeps out a little bit, but I don't know. I'm not clear on where that shadow's coming from. But like that's another decision we could make. We could have more of the body concealed by shadow, simplify those shapes. I think narratively, and these leaves are really nice. These leaves are big light shapes that sort of snake through. I think we should have him. It seems like he's emerging after scavenging around or something. He's been sneaking about in the forest, and he's about to finally see the light of day, and he's very cautious about it. Or maybe his foresty home is in there. So maybe we could increase the amount of foliage and stuff back here, you know? Like he has just snuck out of a... You've got more of it back here. Like this is a well-forested area that he's emerged. Yeah, and that sort of allows us to maybe get a little bit darker behind him as well. You know, like this really is the undergrowth that he's just come out of with his sword. He's ready, he's sneaking. You know, is there gonna be, I don't know, stuff on this side? Maybe. It's probably too evenly split there. Yeah, I think reinforcing the silhouette, just figuring out narratively that he's coming out of shadow. We could even conceal more of the silhouette, you know? It could be that there are more leaves poking over him, because he's looking up very cautiously as if he's sort of snooping around. But in your original, he's barely covered by one leaf. So this feels like he's got his head ducked low into his shoulders, like he's sort of peering around a plant to see if anyone's watching him. And I think you could get that stronger if he is actually doing that thing. You know. So the more I paint, the more I realize that painting is about narrative and reinforcing narrative and story, rather than execution. So let's say there he is. If you wanted to have a really sharp highlight anywhere, it would be as the water turns around, right? Because it's gonna, as it rotates, it's gonna hit a glancing angle where it's bouncing to the sun, which is fun. It kind of does the inverse down here due to water tension, where it's actually rotating concavely. So down here might be a little bit brighter. I'd embrace more of these interesting pebbly bits so we can see more of them. Maybe kill the caustics. I feel like the caustics sort of require a bit more light, so maybe back here we can... I like how subtle they are over here. And then only out here, when they start getting hit by light, do they sort of come to life, you know. So that's another way that we're going to reinforce that silhouette, by just killing some of this information. There's still information in there, but it's subtler. Maybe this leg's in shadow. Do you know? Yeah, I am tempted to just put more of him in shadow. He's creeping out. He's sneaking towards us. You know, is it literally that this leg is like he's stepping into light, literally, right? That's a pretty powerful narrative thing. Could he be doing that in a more exaggerated way? He's like, ooh, That's my first foot into light in 20 years, whatever. I don't know. It depends on the narrative that you want to tell, doesn't it? It'd probably have that foot rotate downwards towards the camera. Okay. Does that make sense? Is there anything else in particular that you want me to speak about or critique? No? Okay. Great. I'll put this in the feedback channel. Okay, we've got one more. Unless anyone else puts something in feedback. There are 7 viewers on Twitch, so feel free to slap something in. I do have 20 minutes left. This one more is... Wow, it's from a AAA concept artist. So let's group that. See, I kind of like that. I kind of like him being a bit more in shadow, so maybe we keep that. Here we are. It's a helicopter design. Let's have a think. Don't pick you up like that. Guys, this is from a AAA mega super concept artist. So just bear in mind that I've got a lot of pressure on me here. Do you mainly want just the design feedback? I mean, it's difficult to critique the rendering when it's done in Blender. You have painted over it though, haven't you? Yeah. Okay. I just... And I was talking with another concept artist recently about this. Whenever I get any designs, my first instinct is to like go push it further. But I realize that my design sensibilities are not they're not A, the same as you, but B, the same as art directors or hiring managers or anything else. So I would, if we're viewing this from like a side view, it's probably looking... Gotta be careful with those back propellers. It's probably looking something like this. And it's got big chunky things. It's got a rotor. And then it's got a front wheel. I like this bit, this landing gear at the front. My temptation would be to see what I can do with that when it's in a really simple state. I think you're clearly going for something quite realistic. But I'd probably go, well, what are the unique or interesting features about this, and how can we take them one step further? So I think that the fact that this front bit is really big and heavy, and this back bit's quite thin. I know it's going to hold another vehicle here, which is why that space is there. I think that's really cool and interesting, and maybe we can make the front bit even, we can exaggerate that fact. So let's try that. So let's get rid of our ground and our wheels, and let's say, what if this front bit is really chunky, and it almost becomes tadpole-esque. This back bit, what if there were multiple of them and they sort of become like ribs or something else? Your propellers are fine. You've got these big chunky engine-y bits. Maybe we don't do that actually. So that would be my instinct. Then in terms of landing gear, I think we want this thing to feel heavier. So maybe we sort of short up there as well. How can it feel heavier? Maybe actually it doesn't have one of those that comes up. But in terms of landing gear, that's a tricky one. I see a lot on commercial aircraft that they have multiple wheels in the same spot, like 3 wheels in a row or something. Like, could that be cool if this thing has to take off with these incredibly heavy loads and land with them? Is it gonna... I guess the thing it's picking up also has wheels that it would land down on, which is fine. Personally, I agree with Jake's critique in the feedback channel, which is I just love quadcopter helicopters. Not quadcopter, bicopter. I love a helicopter with 2 sets of rotors, like a Chinook. I think they're so cool. Yeah, in terms of the actual design itself, things like a railing is a good idea. So I'm thinking like Vietnam Apache. That actually it's got some kind of a railing for you to hang off on. It's quite nice. It's quite difficult to critique without just changing it to something I would make. You know, I don't think anything you've done here is wrong or anything. It's just whether or not I would make a slightly different choice. One of the things that maybe I would like to see more of is variation in material. So you have this rear exhaust that's this nice stainless steel metal, but we don't really see that in many other places. You know, could these front ones also have some kind of an interesting material? This nose, it tends to be on helicopters that the nose is like it's almost like a radar dome or something. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I've drawn a few helicopters. So if we lighten the value or color of the things around it, like the nose is that sort of dark nose that you would see on, again, something like an Apache. Let's give it a little bright button nose. Yeah, something like, I think me and Tom have already spoken about putting graffiti on the vehicles to make them a little bit more colourful. The little wheels wouldn't necessarily get destroyed. The wheels on a helicopter are a lot smaller than the wheels on a plane, because you have to remember that a plane lands on its wheels, if that makes sense. Like a plane, well, actually when a plane lands it faces upwards, not down. Right. And then the wheels take a whole load of force as it collides into the ground at quite high speed. But a helicopter, the wheels are only really there to stabilize it or help when you're moving it, because when it lands, it's landing quite softly. Like it's a very, very controlled descent towards the floor. But I think if you want to signify that it is a load bearing, you know, it's carrying other things, maybe chunking up that aspect wouldn't be such a bad idea. I really like. Is it just a Messerschmitt? I like the planes. First of all, they've got the engines like that. There's the plane. I like the planes that have the landing gear that has almost like trousers on. So it looks a bit like that with the wheels poking out behind. I think it is a Messerschmitt. Let me go and Google Messerschmitt. Oh, is it not a Messerschmitt? It kind of is. You can kind of see from this angle, like the leg guards going down. That's something I find really interesting, and I'd probably exaggerate a bit more. Like, you do have these panels. I mean, one thing is that this panel feels like it should be picking up more light because it's angled outwards. But could that panel be like, you know, much larger? Or go into another panel? And then, yeah, maybe we do size the wheels up. I feel like the bigger wheels... I feel like if you're going to go for a bigger vehicle, yes, it does have bigger wheels. But I think more wheels is a better solution to that problem. Because bigger wheels make the vehicle look smaller. So we could make more wheels, like we could split up this panel into all sorts of shapes. Could it be like a curved panel? See, the thing is, there are a lot of hard edge shapes that I'd probably be tempted to make a little bit softer. But that's your prerogative, so I won't tell you to do that. So, yeah, hopefully all that makes sense. Got 2 more things people want crit for. I'll put my silly little sketches in the feedback channel for you to enjoy. But feel free to call me after this and we'll go through it some more because it is interesting. It's tricky to balance out feedback when it's effectively just what I think is cool and what I don't think is cool, you know. Knight, bam. He is currently just Silly Knight. What's your goal with Mr. Silly Knight? Is there a specific thing you have in mind? Is this for a project? Is it for a film? Is it for a game? Are you trying to practice something in particular? Currently, he's a perfectly pleasant, silly knight. I will say that you have a variation in shape language that I don't think makes him very cohesive. So he has a round hat, and it's quite a simple helmet. Okay, so we got round helmet. Okay, but then these bits on his pants are really square. So now we've got circles, squares. Okay, but this flared pauldron is like insanely complicated spiky shapes. Right, so let's go with the spiky because I think the spiky's interesting, and let's just try and insert that into other places. So let's say, well, first of all, his helmet is gonna receive a bit of spiky. Okay, well, now his helmet's got a little bit of spiky. That's fine. So now those two areas look like they belong to the same guy. Let's... Could we say that these parts of the greaves are spiky? Or maybe the actual silhouette of it is the same, but where we have the spiky is where it becomes layered. So, you know, is this going to have these intertwining shapes? There are all sorts of ways that you could make that interesting. Could the spiky come off the back of those? If it does, how is that going to curve up and into the hand? So I feel like S curves are going to be like a cool thing, aren't they? His shape as a whole feels like maybe he should have more. He should be more chunky, like a Hurt Locker. You know, that kind of a thing. So can you just unify some of the shape language that you're using to make him feel like he belongs? All of these pieces belong. It could be that he has other things that emulate those shapes without doing the same thing. So could he have a cape? Capes are cool. And is the cape gonna be all like ripped and torn? Right. Well, that would copy this shape. In terms of his movement, I would involve the flag in the gesture. So, do you see how I've removed the flagpole? But effectively, this guy's pose seems fine. Like, he's not going to fall over or anything. I think when someone interacts with a prop, generally it's a good idea to have the prop and the pose be intertwined in a way where they are reliant on each other, or at least they interact with each other enough that it kind of looks a bit weird when you remove it. So, well, that might mean that actually this guy's arm is foreshortened like this, and he's using that flagpole to walk, you know, almost like a big stick or a staff. It could mean that his arm comes down and then down again, and the flagpole sort of comes out in perspective towards the viewer, right? Well, that sort of serves the purpose of pointing in the direction that he's traveling. It's a big pointy stick, says this is where I'm going. So you could do that. But I would certainly, I mean, I think my preferred one is just bringing the flagpole closer in, maybe pointing it down to the floor or something. Or you could have it go the opposite way. Don't know why he'd be holding it like that though. Maybe he's holding it like that because he's sort of, that's not, you know, is he sort of bent over a little bit, like he's he really has to lean on this thing, and then we can just go all the way and say, you know, he's like clinging on to this tattered flagpole because it's the banner of his lord, and they've just lost a battle, and he's like barely escaped, you know, and he's like, "Bleh. This is the only thing I have left." I think that could be a fun little story. And so maybe this leg should come out and then back in. Now he's got 3 legs. Let's get rid of this one. There he goes. So yeah, main big things is the change in shape language. Pick one of those. You can't have pointy, round, and square all tightly weaved together on the same person. You might on a micro level, but certainly on a knight, I think people intuitively understand the helmet to be the focal point. I don't know anyone who looks at a knight and doesn't look at the helmet first, like that's the coolest part. Certainly the part that an audience might be interacting with. So get that helmet looking cool, same sort of shape language that can go into the drapery, and then I'm just keen on getting more of an interaction with the flagpole itself. So let me tag you in that, the feedback channel. Let's have a look at this, shall we? Next is Rishab. You want to know any feedback on composition and painting over 3D? If and when you should paint over renders? This is a cybernetic workshop with theatrical elements. Okay. I feel like you have to commit to doing a full paint over, or leave it fairly just the 3D. I think you've done quite a nice job here of it feeling stylistically consistent. It seems like all you've done is like smudge brush a few edges. Maybe you've done more, but you've hidden it well. That seems like a bit of a mixer brush or a smudge brush there. And I think that's good. I think that it feels like it all belongs. You know, you wouldn't want to go, now I'm gonna like hand paint some of these elements and then it's gonna look a little bit weird. Or you could hand paint a whole load of it, right? So there's not much of an in between. I feel like in between is where it gets a little bit meh, a little bit muddy, a little bit messy. Yeah, mix of brush here and there's fine. I think you've done a good job of that. The composition doesn't really tell me anything. I think my issue with the composition is that there seems to be a circle of mannequins. Then there's a circle on the floor. It feels like there should be something here, like I don't know, an object or a person, or maybe in this floor spot there should be an object or a person, but it's just a black circle. It feels like you're trying to make me look at something, but there's nothing to look at. Unless you want me to look at these bodies, in which case they're just not very visually interesting, right? It just does seem like a cybernetic corpse hanging up. So, yeah. What do you want me to look at? That's a good question. What is it about this that you want the viewer to feast their eyes on? It doesn't necessarily have to be anything. It could just be that you're showing off the environment as a whole. I'm kind of drawn to this over here, just because it's got a face, and I think people are drawn to faces. But that's not. I don't think this is meant to be the focal point. I don't know. Just showing off the environment, the vibes. Okay. I feel like the vibes should be scarier than they are. I feel like there are lots of corpses hanging up and blood everywhere, but actually it feels like I wouldn't really mind hanging out in this space. So, how can we fix that? Let's just try and curve so levels adjust it a little bit. You know, even just that. Do you see how that levels adjustment? There's all I've done is expose for the light in the scene. No, expose for the shadow in the scene. No. Yeah, expose for the light. I've exposed for the lights, and therefore the shadows are lower. I can see a little bit more information on the windows. But actually, it feels more like someone hiding out now. Does that make sense? It feels more like a hidden space because it's darker. Like they've shut the curtains to stop the light getting in so people can't see what they're up to. You're trying that. Yeah, I think that is a bit much. I quite like the natural light. I feel like the natural light coming into the environment says that maybe it's more abandoned, or out of use or hidden away. You know, it's kind of like in quite a few action horror films where you see it's like a big city, but you go into an apartment block or an office block that's abandoned with plastic sheets hanging up, and the natural lights coming in, and you can hear the street below, and it's all bustling and busy, but you still understand that this is sort of in a limbo between the bustling street and something that is completely deserted, right? So life carries on outside, and no one knows that this is happening. That almost makes it more nefarious. Do you know what I mean? I don't know if I'm explaining myself very well. The idea, storytelling wise, that this window below is like a really busy street in a cyberpunk city, and none of those people know that just above their heads there's like a villainous, horrible lair going on, is much creepier to me and much more interesting than no, his villain base is in the middle of the Swiss Alps, deep underground, and no one can find it. I think there's more of a juxtaposition between the outside world and what's coming inside. The other thing that this does, when you reduce the levels like this, is this silhouette of this corpse molds into the silhouette of the ground and the circle, and a lot of these shadow shapes get grouped in quite a nice, appealing way. One thing you could do to maybe better lead a viewer around the scene is the blood. The blood. I feel like the blood is, I don't know, a Perlin noise map in Blender and not placed particularly thoughtfully. Okay. So I'm going to tell you off. Let's just get rid of old blood for now. We'll replace the blood. Okay, don't worry. We'll bring it back. We'll get it back. Okay, so we've gotten rid of a lot of the pools of blood. Ooh. Do they have a direction that they're traveling in? If this room is set up to be used for hacking apart cybernetic corpses, does it have a drain like the life drawing room? If it doesn't have a drain, does he have a mop? Will he have swept the rug into a particular location? Is there going to be a bucket with a load of blood in, right, that he's sort of mopped up? Maybe the blood is just denser in one area than another. I think one thing that I really like about anything is the idea that visually it's off balance. So we can do this. We can do this in all sorts of ways. Here's a box, and here are 3 evenly spread dots. In fact, we'll do more. We'll do. You know, it's very uniform, and it doesn't say anything about the box other than how uniform it is. Okay, but if I now have a box where actually a lot of that information is collected densely in one area and gradates out, well, I'm saying that there is a difference over here. You know, as you travel through this area, something is changing. There's a transition of some kind. You know, it doesn't have to just be about density. Maybe the blood's really, really messy over here, and then actually over here it's like little drippy droppies, or could change shape. You know, the blood over here could be running in vents or seam lines in the floor, and as it gets towards this corner, it becomes overwhelming. It sort of breaks out of those shapes. So there's a definite change in visual interest once you have something travel. It's the same thing with like an equilateral triangle. It's not even an equilateral triangle. If all 3 sides are roughly the same length, it's not going anywhere. There's no travel. But if you have like, you know, something like this, we're traveling. We're going to a point. I need to figure out a way to put this into better words, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. The idea is effectively that I want there to be some. You can't just put blood everywhere. It's got to tie it into some storytelling or something, right? It says something about, well, he's chopping the corpses up in a particular location because maybe he does it over here. Is this thing in the floor like a? That could be like a drain, couldn't it? Like I quite like that idea. He's got a little drain in the floor over here. This is the killing zone, and then he brings them over and hangs them up. Right? And maybe some of that blood is still over here. Maybe it sort of trails around or drips from the bodies. So yeah, you could have it under the bodies as if they're dripping, and then they're almost like the blood then almost becomes like a form of drop shadow, right? So if there's blood here underneath this body pooling, then you know that that's the ground point for that. Then maybe there's more here underneath this body. The blood is really interesting because it's quite reflective. It could be that these patches of blood let you bring that light back into the environment further in, you know? So you've got quite a matte floor, but all of a sudden you've got a reflective material on that matte floor. So the light can travel, you know? I don't know. Where's my... So that's all of my blood layers. That's how you had it. I think now we have details coming from somewhere, and it's traveling across somewhere. I think one problem here is I've made the environment so dark that this now looks like a pit or something, like you could fall in it. I'm still not sure what it's meant to be, why it's there. It feels really important because it's a big circle at the center of the environment, but maybe something else on it, even if it's just a tiny bit descriptive, like, you know, if I just put another seam line on the middle of it. Well, now I know it's not like a hole to hell. Now I know it's a solid object. It's a stage, like a... What kind of a stage? It could be that if it's a stage, like at the moment this yellow over here is only on Kit's head. Could it be that if it's a stage, it has little LEDs built into the base or something, right? To light it up for whoever's stood on it. That feels very stagey, doesn't it? Like a circle that a magician would stand in, or almost like a helicopter landing pad. Again, can we differentiate it from the material of the rest of the room? Could it be more reflective? Actually, that's now silhouetting those feet in an interesting way. It pops up. Yeah, I'd have lights around it or something. If it's gonna pop up, then I know he's a villain, but we can utilize the conventions of health and safety and say that it's a moving element, so anyone in this space would need some kind of a visual warning that this thing's gonna go down or up, and lights might do that quite nicely. As I understand it though, so you saying that this opens and then something else comes out? Because if that's what you want, then 100% let's get a seam line in, and then let's also not have it perfectly flush with the floor. Like, actually, let's introduce... I mean, it probably wasn't before I turned the brightness down anyway, but... Yeah, some of that yellow gonna... Right, to me, just the seam line and the more of a bevel going on there makes that feel... And the lights makes that feel more like a stage. It also makes it feel more like a focal point. Oh wow, it's a GIF. Is the GIF gonna load? Oh yeah, it is. Oh, so the version that's up currently is not the door. The stage is the dark object, is that right? Yeah, so if the stage is the dark object, then we should do the bottom. We should do the opposite. We should have... You know, it should have thickness, like it feels like it's above everything else. I think it feels too flat at the moment. Yeah, I really like how it's going. I think just every time you make a decision, have it be purposeful. And that goes for anything, right? Getting deep and philosophical now. When you brush your teeth in the morning, make sure that you're doing it on purpose and not accidentally. So blood, lighting, like these are very deliberate decisions. I think the hanging up corpses are strong enough. I think that these other mannequins that are sort of lying around potentially confuse the scene a little. Maybe this one's okay, but like I'm not sure. When I look at it, I'm going, is this the same material and thing as this? Like, is that a corpse, or is that like a more advanced mannequin or something? Could you... Let's just... Let's say that's gone. Well, it opens up some space. Maybe you want to bring the mannequins back in. Could they be over here? You know, silhouetted against that window or something. This almost feels like a... If you're going with like performer and stage, this feels like a dressing room closet, doesn't it? With like a row of them. It also reinforces the perspective. It gives us more space here when he comes up his stage. Is he going to step off or on? Maybe we could extend the snaking cable up or something if that's something you wanted to do. Lots to think about. Lots and lots and lots and lots and lots to think about. I'm going to put this in feedback, Rishab. And then I don't think anyone else has asked for feedback. No, they haven't. So I'm going to end the stream. Goodbye.